I've been really interested about parks, and if you think about like some of the parks are just so vibrant, so popular, and so well loved, and I personally would hang out there every day. But then there are also the other types of parks that seem a little sad, is unpopular, and even unsafe. So I started to wonder like what makes a park so successful and well loved, but then others feel so lonely and even unsafe. When I started to read more about it, and lately I've been reading the book The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacob. It's actually one of the most well-known book that has influenced the American city planning ideas and philosophy nowadays. And so in the book, author Jane Jacobs, she is a writer and an activist. So she has been advocating for community-oriented city planning approach that kind of striving for preserving existing communities and advocating for mixed use, preserving old neighborhoods. At the time, there's this other urban planner called Robert Moses in New York City. He was the most powerful urban planner at the time, and his approach was more of a top-down, really focusing on like large-scale modern infrastructure and urban renewals, but could be at the expense of disrupting local neighborhoods. So at the time, Jane Jacob wrote the book as a critique for Robert Moses' approach. As I was reading the book, one interesting observation that the book describes is that when we think about how do we improve a neighborhood, having like adding a park is usually like the most commonly thought of thing. Like, yes, I love more open space, I love more parks and things like that. But it's actually a false reassurance because parks' behaviors, just like humans, they can be actually quite volatile and extreme as well. So let's dive into the layers of complexity of park design. So the first driver of a park's success is diversity and also the mixture of use. So that one is not hard to understand. The key thing is really emphasizing on the context surrounding a park, not just the park itself. So when you think of a lively park, that was surprising to me when I first read it. Like the most important thing is actually having enough people who enter and leave the park at different times of the day. And so that requires a mix of like primary use surrounding the park. So a bit of residential, a bit of offices, and mom and pop shop, small business, and etc. And that's why parks in financial district, if you think about it, tend to be less lively because people all operate on the same daily schedule. So they will all enter the park around like 9 or 10 in the day, then they'll leave after work hours. And what it means for the park is that the park for the most of the day and also in the evening, it's quite empty. And so when an area has like a single dominant use, that actually imposes a limited schedule, and that could lead to a vicious circle in terms of a park feeling more sad and like less people visit, and so less people visit it in the long term. So that's kind of the diversity of mixed use and how the surrounding of it and people's schedule is actually very important in park success. The other driver is more around thinking about diversity but within the park. So beyond having a diverse schedule and usage diversity, Jane Jacobs additionally introduced 4 essential elements of a lively park, and they all kind of essentially leads to the diversity at different levels. So the first one is what Jane Jacob calls intricacy. So it basically means that at the eye level, a vibrant park usually offers sufficient stimulation at different usage and moods. And so the counterexample of that is when a park is too small and you can basically see the whole thing at a glance. That's not enough of a stimulation at the eye level to keep people around, because I just feel like I already know what's going on and there's less attraction for me to feel like, oh, I can always discover something new. And so if you think of the more intricate parks where maybe they have different ground levels, they have tree groupings that kind of keep you there, and then you always wonder, oh, what's behind that tree or what's behind that angle, then that's what makes park very engaging for users. And so a few examples that the book mentioned, one of them is actually how San Francisco is full of valleys, so it's all the ups and downs. So that's actually a really good example where the ups and downs of the hills that introduce intricacy at the eye level. So at a glance, you don't really see the whole picture, and you always wonder what's behind that hill, like what's behind that particular angle where it's blocked. The other example that I thought of is the classical gardens in Suzhou in China, where the whole garden design is very strategic. So all the locations of the landscape, the rocks, the hills and rivers, they're all strategically located in the garden. to introduce that subtle eye stimulation from every angle. So no matter where you are in the park, every angle, every turns, you actually see something different, something new, and that keep you in the park and feel like there's sufficient things to explore, even though it's just a limited space in general. But the design matters a lot there. The two other related elements is centering and enclosure. So for the centering piece, I feel like that's the part where it's actually similar to writing a novel or like a good story, where in the hero journey there's always a climax. So it's the same for a park. Like in the park, there's the center. So if we think about the Washington Square Park in New York, the fountain is essentially the center. And even though isn't like an explicit stage, but in reality, it is kind of a stage settings where people hang out there. And what's fun about it is for people who love people watching the park, you're both a spectator and a performer at the same time, because you might be watching other people, but other people are watching you as well. So just people hang out in the center kind of becomes a stage, and then so that's what makes a park lively as well. You gotta have some type of a climax or centering, enclosed area, so it feels like a stage. And finally, sun is also very important, otherwise the park feels sad and less attractive, because I'm the type of person who, if there's sunshine, like it just makes my mood so much better, it makes the park so much better. Right. And then the third driver is differentiation for a park with command good. So that's the one that was least expected, and I thought it was very interesting because it kind of connects to the economics of it a bit more. So Jane Jacob mentioned that the third driver of Lively Park is thinking about how it differentiates. So it really just reminds me of like how we like build products nowadays. We gotta understand its differentiated value, because as we mentioned before, the key of a park being super lively is that people actually visit it. People chose this park over the other parks because of its location or its mixed use. So as we can imagine, there are so many parks in the city, and sometimes they had similar purpose or they're too close to each other. And so just like building a product, we need to think about what specific differentiated value this a particular park provides, because we're kind of fighting for people's attention in limited time, just like TikTok and Instagram. So that's an interesting parallel there. So Jane Jacobs encourages us to think about the demand good of a specific park. So in terms of some of the examples that she mentioned, like having nice landscape itself is not a command good, but having sporting fields like a soccer field or like swimming pool, or like park activities like walk-in theater or carnivals and things like that, these are demand good, where it can generate demand and attract people to come to the park. The other thing that I feel like actually resembles a lot of like tech development is we can also understand the use case of a park by just observing its natural use. So how people organically engage with it, how people use it, identify the product market fit of a park that way. So these are some of the interesting learnings that I thought was very interconnected with tech, design, and even just psychology in general, where we investigate like a park behavior and how some of the various factors and complexity that really impact what makes a well-loved versus unpopular. And so ultimately, the making of a park isn't just the building of the park itself, it's both ensuring diversity of the park, like intricacy at the eye level, enough sense of a stage so people love to hang out there, but also diversity in the surrounding environment. So it's not about the park, but it's also about nurturing enough of a diverse neighborhoods nearby, so it's capable of using and supporting those parks, so not just the parks by itself. And that's a great example where in order to make the design successful, it's also really important to account for its overall ecosystem surrounding it and considering the overall context of it to ensure its long-term success. All right, so that's it for today's park episode. See you next time.